The morning fog clung to Ramstein Air Base like smoke from a dying cigarette, and security airman First Class Rodriguez thought it was going to be another routine Tuesday until the woman approached his checkpoint. She wore civilian clothes, faded jeans, a leather jacket that had seen better decades, and combat boots that whispered stories of distant battlefields. No identification visible. No escort. No appointment logged in the system. Just a steady walk toward the most secure military installation in Europe, carrying herself like she owned the place. "Ma'am, you need to stop right there," Rodriguez called out, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. Something about her didn't add up. She was maybe 5'6", mid-40s, with prematurely gray hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his defensive posture. Most civilians approached military gates with nervous energy, fidgeting with documents, practicing their explanations. This woman moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had walked through far more dangerous places than a German airbase. "I need to speak with Colonel Morrison," she said simply, stopping exactly where he'd indicated, hands visible at her sides. Her voice carried the subtle rasp of someone who had spent years shouting over jet engines. Rodriguez glanced at his partner, Staff Sergeant Kim, who was already pulling up the visitor database. "Ma'am, do you have an appointment? Are you on the contractor list? I'm going to need some identification and a clear statement of your business here." The woman reached slowly into her jacket pocket, movements deliberate and unthreatening, and produced a driver's license. Rodriguez took it, nodding the address was local. She lived just outside Kaiserslautern. The name read, Vesper Thorn, age 43. Nothing remarkable about it except for the photograph. Even in the sterile DMV lighting, those eyes held the same unsettling intensity he was seeing now. "Ms. Thorne, I don't see any appointments scheduled, and Colonel Morrison doesn't typically see walk-in civilians. If you could explain the nature of your—" "Tell him Wraith is here about the Kandahar files." The effect was immediate and confusing. Rodriguez had never heard the code name before, but Staff Sergeant Kim went rigid beside him, his hand moving to the radio with practiced urgency. Whatever those words meant, they carried weight that a random civilian shouldn't possess. Kim stepped away, speaking in hushed, rapid tones into his radio, and Rodriguez found himself alone with this woman who somehow made him feel like he was the one being evaluated. Minutes stretched like hours until Kim returned, his expression transformed from skepticism to something approaching awe. "Command says escort her to Building 52 immediately. VIP treatment. Full honors." Colonel Benjamin Morrison hadn't slept well in 3 months, not since the classified report landed on his desk with the red-striped cover that meant secrets someone had died to protect. The Kandahar incident from 2019 was supposed to be buried so deep that only 5 people in the entire Department of Defense knew the full truth. He was one of them, and the weight of that knowledge had been slowly eating him alive. Now his aide was telling him that Wraith, a call sign that appeared in exactly 3 classified documents, each more heavily redacted than the last, was sitting in his outer office requesting a meeting. Morrison had spent hours trying to piece together who Wraith actually was, following paper trails that led to dead ends and classified databases that required clearances he didn't have. The person behind that call sign had performed actions in Afghanistan that defied both military protocol and apparent physics, saving hundreds of lives while somehow remaining completely invisible to official records. His intercom buzzed, "Sir, Ms. Thorne is here." Morrison straightened his dress uniform, ran a hand through his graying hair, and tried to prepare himself for a conversation he'd never thought would happen. "Send her in." The woman who entered his office moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command, but there was something else, a careful restraint that suggested she was consciously moderating her natural intensity. She was smaller than he'd expected, wearing civilian clothes that couldn't quite disguise the ramrod posture of someone who had spent decades in uniform. Her eyes swept the room once, cataloging exits, sight lines, and potential threats with the automatic awareness of a combat veteran. "Colonel Morrison," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm without being aggressive, the handshake of someone who had nothing to prove but everything to protect. "Ms. Thorne, or should I say?" "Vesper is fine. I haven't used that call sign in 4 years." She settled into the chair across from his desk, declining his offer of coffee with a slight shake of her head. "I assume you know why I'm here." Morrison leaned back, studying her face for any tells. "I know about Kandahar. I know that someone with your call sign did something that saved the lives of 300 coalition personnel and an unknown number of civilians. I know that same someone disappeared from all official records immediately afterward. What I don't know is why you're sitting in my office now, or why you chose to surface after 4 years of being a ghost." Vesper was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the window where C-130 Hercules aircraft were visible on the distant runway, their massive forms stark against the overcast German sky. "Because someone is trying to weaponize what happened that day, and if they succeed, everything we sacrificed for will be meaningless." The morning briefing at Ramstein had been routine until Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen noticed the anomalous flight request buried in the daily logs. Someone had submitted paperwork for a single aircraft mission to a set of coordinates that didn't correspond to any known friendly base or approved operational area. The flight plan was signed off with authorizations that checked out technically, but felt wrong professionally. Too clean, too convenient, lacking the usual bureaucratic friction that accompanied genuinely classified missions. Chen had been working intelligence for 8 years, long enough to develop an instinct for when patterns didn't fit. This felt like someone with legitimate access was using proper procedures to accomplish something unofficially sanctioned. The problem was that the request had been approved, the aircraft allocated, and the mission scheduled to launch in 6 hours. She was still puzzling over the discrepancies when her secure phone rang. The voice on the other end was crisp, authoritative, and completely unfamiliar. "Colonel Chen, this is General Patricia Hayes, Pentagon Strategic Operations. I need you to ground any aircraft attempting to launch under mission designation Osprey 77. Chen felt her stomach drop. General Hayes wasn't just any Pentagon official. She was the woman who had revolutionized close air support doctrine in Iraq and later became the first female pilot to command an entire theater of operations. If Hayes was making direct calls to ground-level intelligence officers, something significant was happening. "General, the mission you're referring to is already approved through proper channels. I'd need to see countermanding orders with appropriate." "Colonel, the proper channels have been compromised. Someone is using legitimate authorizations to launch an unauthorized mission, and if that aircraft reaches its destination, people are going to die. A lot of people." The line went quiet except for the distant hum of aircraft engines outside Chen's office window. She was being asked to make a decision that could end her career if she was wrong, but might save lives if she was right. The weight of that choice settled on her shoulders like a lead blanket. "General, with respect, I need verification of your authority to issue such an order. This is highly irregular. Check your secure email. You'll have written confirmation in 30 seconds. And Colonel, once you see those orders, you'll understand why this conversation never happened." Chen's computer chimed with an incoming message marked with security classifications she'd only seen twice in her career. The orders were genuine, backed by authorizations that went all the way to the Joint Chiefs, and they painted a picture that made her blood run cold. Someone was planning to use a military aircraft to deliver weapons to coordinates that matched the location of a refugee camp in northern Syria. Vesper Thorne sat in the passenger seat of the staff car, watching the German countryside blur past as Corporal Jenkins navigated the narrow roads leading to the auxiliary airfield. She hadn't spoken since leaving Morrison's office, partly because operational security demanded silence, but mostly because She was trying to reconcile the person she used to be with the person she needed to become again. 4 years ago, she'd been Major Vesper Thorne, call sign Wraith, flying A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft in support of ground operations across Afghanistan. She'd accumulated more combat hours than any pilot in her squadron, earned the respect of infantry units who knew that when Wraith was on station, they were coming home alive. Her aircraft had been distinctive, nose art depicting a spectral figure emerging from storm clouds, with the words "Death from above" stenciled below in precise military font. The Kandahar incident had changed everything. What started as a routine close air support mission became something else entirely when intelligence failures led coalition forces into a trap that should have killed everyone involved. Vesper had been forced to make decisions that violated direct orders, ignored established rules of engagement, and pushed her aircraft beyond any reasonable operational limits. She'd saved lives, but she'd also created questions that the military hierarchy couldn't answer without admitting to intelligence failures that reached the highest levels of command. The solution had been elegant and brutal. Vesper Thorne officially died in a training accident. Major Thorne became Ms. Thorne. Her service records were classified at levels that effectively erased her from history, and she was relocated to Germany with a new identity and a pension that ensured her silence. She'd spent 4 years learning to be a civilian, teaching herself to sleep without listening for incoming mortars, to shop for groceries without cataloging potential ambush points, to exist in a world where her most difficult decision was whether to have coffee or tea with breakfast. But some skills never fade. As they approached the airfield, Vesper automatically noted wind direction from the movement of grass, calculated approach angles from the runway layout, and identified the aircraft types by their silhouettes against the gray sky. Her hands, resting calmly in her lap, remembered the exact pressure required to manipulate flight controls, fire weapons, and communicate life-or-death information to ground units under fire. Jenkins cleared his throat nervously. "Ma'am, can I ask what kind of aircraft you used to fly?" Vesper's reflection in the side window showed a woman who looked like a suburban mother running errands, but for just a moment, she let him see the pilot underneath. "The kind that brings people home, Corporal." The C-130 Hercules, designated for the unauthorized mission, sat on the tarmac like a sleeping giant, its 4 turboprop engines silent, but ready for the mission that Colonel Chen was desperately trying to prevent. Technical Sergeant Maria Santos had been performing pre-flight inspections for 12 years, and something about this particular aircraft felt wrong from the moment she approached it. The cargo manifest didn't match the mission profile. According to paperwork, they were carrying humanitarian supplies to a refugee assistance station, but the weight distribution was all wrong, and there were containers secured in the hold that didn't match any humanitarian aid configuration she'd ever seen. When she'd questioned the loadmaster about the discrepancies, he'd shown her authorizations signed by people she'd never heard of and told her to stick to her own responsibilities. Santos had learned to trust her instincts during deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Cargo that didn't match its paperwork usually meant someone was shipping things they didn't want officially documented, and in her experience, that rarely ended well for the people actually flying the mission. She was checking the starboard landing gear when her radio crackled to life. "All personnel, this is base operations. Aircraft 779er is grounded pending investigation. Flight crew report to operations immediately. Ground crew secure the aircraft and allow no unauthorized access." The relief that washed over Santos was immediate and telling. She'd been unconsciously holding her breath, waiting for someone in authority to recognize what she could only sense, that this mission was wrong in ways that went beyond simple paperwork errors. As she began securing the aircraft, Santos noticed a staff car approaching the flight line at speed, official flags flying from the front fenders. Whoever was arriving had enough authority to travel with full military honors, and given the timing, They were probably connected to the order grounding her aircraft. The woman who stepped out of the vehicle looked like someone's aunt visiting for the weekend, but she moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent significant time around military aircraft. Santos watched her approach, noting how her eyes automatically swept the flight line, cataloging aircraft types, wind direction, and potential hazards with the unconscious awareness of someone who belonged in this environment. "Sergeant, I need to inspect the cargo manifest for this aircraft." Santos studied the woman's face, seeing something in her expression that reminded her of the best officers she'd served under, people who inspired confidence not through rank or authority, but through competence that was impossible to fake. "Ma'am, I don't have authorization to." "Sergeant Santos, my name is Vesper Thorne. Check with your operations center. They'll confirm my authority." The radio exchange took less than 2 minutes, but it transformed Santos's understanding of who she was talking to. Operations didn't just confirm Thorne's authority. They ordered Santos to provide complete cooperation and maintain operational security about anything she observed. General Patricia Hayes had been awake for 36 hours, coordinating a response to intelligence that suggested someone within the military command structure was planning to use official resources for an unofficial war. The evidence was fragmentary but disturbing. Aircraft diverted from legitimate missions, weapons shipments that disappeared from official tracking, and personnel orders that moved key people into positions where they could enable or conceal unauthorized operations. The Kandahar files that Vesper had mentioned contained the technical details of weapons systems that officially didn't exist, deployed by personnel who had never been officially assigned to that theater of operations. Someone with access to those files could potentially reverse engineer weapons technology that the United States had spent billions developing, or worse, use the information to create plausible cover for attacks that would be attributed to American forces. Hayes stood in the Pentagon's Secure Communications Center, surrounded by monitors displaying real-time intelligence from 3 continents, trying to piece together a conspiracy that seemed to reach into the highest levels of military command. Her aide, Major Collins, approached with another folder marked with security classifications that made her stomach turn. "General, we've identified the source of the false authorizations. Someone has been using General Morrison's command codes to approve missions that Morrison never saw. The security breach goes back at least 6 months, possibly longer." Hayes felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Morrison was clean. His codes had been compromised, used by someone with enough access to military systems to forge authorization for complex operations. The Ramstein mission had been just one part of a larger plan, and stopping it had probably triggered emergency protocols that would accelerate whatever timeline the conspirators were operating under. "Major, I need you to coordinate with every Allied command in the European theater. Someone just lost their primary operational asset, which means they're going to accelerate to secondary options. I want every unusual aircraft movement, every emergency supply request, every personnel transfer logged and analyzed." Her secure phone rang, displaying an encrypted number she recognized. Colonel Morrison's voice was tense with controlled urgency. "General Hayes, Vesper Thorne has identified the weapons shipment that was loaded on the grounded aircraft. Ma'am, we're not just looking at unauthorized military operations. Someone has been planning to stage false flag attacks using American weapons, with enough technical sophistication to make the attacks appear completely legitimate." The implications hit Hayes like a physical blow. False flag operations using genuine American military technology could justify retaliatory strikes, shift international alliances, or provide cover for actions that would otherwise be considered war crimes. The people behind this conspiracy weren't just stealing weapons. They were planning to use those weapons to start a war. Vesper Thorne knelt beside the opened cargo container, her hands steady despite the implications of what she was seeing. The weapons secured inside weren't standard military issue. They were prototypes, systems so advanced that their existence was classified above the level most generals could access. Someone had been systematically diverting cutting-edge American military technology, packaging it to look like humanitarian supplies, and shipping it to destinations that weren't on any official mission list. Technical Sergeant Santos stood beside her, holding a manifest that listed the container's contents as medical supplies and water purification equipment. The actual contents told a different story: guidance systems for precision munitions, electronic warfare packages, and communication equipment designed for special operations. Each piece was worth millions of dollars and represented years of development by the most classified research programs in the American defense industry. "Sergeant, have you seen shipments like this before?" Vesper asked, carefully photographing the weapons with a secure camera that would encrypt the images immediately. Santos was quiet for a moment, her expression troubled. "Not exactly like this, ma'am, but over the past 6 months, we've had a lot of cargo that didn't match its paperwork. Always with perfect authorizations, always with orders not to ask questions. I started keeping my own records because something felt wrong." Vesper looked up sharply. Unofficial records maintained by a veteran NCO could provide the evidence needed to trace the full scope of the conspiracy. "Sergeant, I need to see those records immediately. This goes much deeper than a single unauthorized mission." While Santos retrieved her documentation, Vesper continued her inspection of the weapons cache. Each system bore manufacturing codes that would allow them to be traced back to specific defense contractors. But more importantly, they were configured in combinations that suggested specific operational intentions. This wasn't random theft. Someone with deep knowledge of American military capabilities had selected these particular weapons for a specific purpose. Her secure phone vibrated with an encrypted message from General Hayes. "Secondary locations identified. Similar operations launching from 3 additional bases. You need to move to intercept." Vesper felt the familiar weight of operational responsibility settling on her shoulders. 4 years of civilian life hadn't erased her ability to think tactically, to see patterns in complex situations, to make decisions under pressure that other people couldn't or wouldn't make. The woman who had walked away from military service was gone. Major Thorne was back. "Santos, I need the fastest aircraft on this base, and I need it ready to fly in 30 minutes. Santos looked at her with the expression of someone who had just realized they were witnessing the return of a legend. "Ma'am, what type of mission profile are we looking at?" Vesper stood, brushing dust from her civilian clothes, and for a moment the pretense of being a regular person fell away completely. "The kind where people die if we're not fast enough, Sergeant. The kind where coming home isn't guaranteed, but other people's survival depends on us trying anyway." The call came through on General Hayes's direct line at 3:47 hours, rousing her from the first sleep she'd attempted in 2 days. The voice on the other end was crisp with urgency. "General, this is Colonel Morrison at Ramstein. We've identified 3 additional sites where similar operations are scheduled to launch within the next 12 hours. The scope of this conspiracy is beyond anything we initially estimated." Hayes was fully alert before Morrison finished speaking. She'd spent her career preparing for complex military operations, but this situation was unprecedented. American military resources being systematically diverted by people within the command structure itself. Weapons being distributed to locations that could destabilize entire regions if those weapons were used for their apparent intended purpose. "Colonel, what's our current operational status?" "Ma'am, Vesper Thorne is airborne in an F-16 Block 70, call sign Wraith 7. She's en route to intercept the operation launching from Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. The aircraft there is a C-17 Globemaster carrying enough advanced weapons systems to equip a small army. If it reaches its destination, coordinates that correspond to a refugee camp near the Syrian border, those weapons will disappear into a conflict zone where they can be used to justify almost any level of retaliation. Hayes felt the familiar clarity that came with fully understanding the stakes of a mission. This wasn't just about stopping unauthorized weapons shipments. It was about preventing someone from using American military technology to start a regional war that could drag in NATO allies and destabilize the entire Middle East. "Colonel, patch me through to Wraith 7. I need to coordinate directly with her." The radio connection was crystal clear despite the distance, and when Vesper's voice came through, Hayes heard the controlled intensity of a pilot who had returned to her natural environment. "Wraith 7 to command. I have visual on the target aircraft. C-17 Globemaster, military markings, following a flight path that will take it directly over Turkish airspace toward the Syrian border. Request permission to engage." Hayes felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders. The decision she was about to make could end her career if it was wrong, but could save thousands of lives if it was right. "Wraith 7, you are authorized to take any action necessary to prevent that aircraft from reaching its destination. Rules of engagement are weapons-free." "Copy that command. Wraith 7 is engaging." Lieutenant Colonel Elena Rodriguez had been flying C-17 Globemaster III aircraft for 8 years, and she'd never carried cargo that made her more uncomfortable than the sealed containers secured in her hold. The mission briefing had been sparse. Deliver humanitarian supplies to coordinates near the Syrian border, maintain radio silence during the final approach, and return to base immediately after payload delivery. Standard procedure for sensitive humanitarian operations, except for the armed escort that wasn't on any official flight plan. 2 F-15E Strike Eagles flanked her aircraft, close enough that she could see the pilots in their cockpits. They weren't responding to radio calls, weren't following standard formation protocols, and their weapons pylons were loaded with air-to-air missiles that were completely inappropriate for escorting a humanitarian mission. Rodriguez had tried to raise base operations twice, but her radio calls were being jammed by sophisticated electronic countermeasures that suggested military-grade equipment. Someone was ensuring that her aircraft remained isolated from official oversight during the most critical phase of the mission. She was checking her navigation systems when her radar warning receiver began screaming. A single aircraft was approaching at high speed from the southwest, flying an intercept course that would put it directly in her path. The contact was moving too fast to be anything other than a fighter aircraft, and its approach profile suggested hostile intent. "Unknown aircraft approaching. This is Lifeline 47 carrying humanitarian supplies under international protection. Identify yourself and state your intentions." The response came immediately, transmitted on emergency frequencies that cut through the jamming like a knife. "Lifeline 47, this is Wraith 7. You are ordered to immediately divert to Incirlik Air Base for inspection of cargo. Any deviation from this instruction will be considered hostile action." Rodriguez felt her throat tighten. Wraith 7 wasn't a call sign she recognized, but the authority in that voice was unmistakable, someone with the confidence that came from having legal authorization to make demands backed by lethal force. Her escort aircraft were already maneuvering to intercept the approaching fighter, their movements aggressive enough to suggest they had orders to prevent any interference with the mission. Rodriguez found herself in the middle of what appeared to be a confrontation between different factions of American military forces, carrying cargo she wasn't authorized to inspect, flying toward a destination that might not be what she'd been told. "All aircraft, this is Wraith 7. The aircraft you are escorting is carrying stolen military weapons intended for use in false flag operations. Stand down immediately or face engagement." Vesper Thorne felt the familiar weight of the F-16's controls beneath her hands, the aircraft responding to her inputs with the precision of a finely tuned instrument. She hadn't flown in combat for 4 years, but muscle memory and tactical awareness were flooding back with crystalline clarity. The situation developing ahead of her was tactically complex. A heavy transport aircraft flanked by two escort fighters, all flying toward coordinates that intelligence had identified as a staging area for weapons that would be used to justify military actions that could destabilize the entire region. Her radar showed the escort fighters moving to intercept her, their approach vectors designed to force her into a defensive posture that would allow the transport to continue toward its destination. Standard convoy protection tactics, executed with professional precision by pilots who were almost certainly unaware of what they were actually protecting. Wraith 7 to escort aircraft. I am transmitting authentication codes that will verify my authority to stop this mission. Check with your operations centers immediately. The radio remained silent for nearly 30 seconds, long enough for Vesper to close to within missile range of the formation. When the response came, it was tense with confusion. Wraith 7, this is Eagle 1. Our Ops Center confirms your authentication, but we have valid orders to protect this mission. We need clarification from higher authority. Vesper understood their position. They were professional military pilots following legitimate orders, unaware that those orders had been issued by people operating outside official chain of command. The situation required precision. She needed to stop the transport without engaging American pilots who were doing their jobs. Eagle 1, the cargo aboard that transport includes weapons systems that will be used to stage attacks attributed to American forces. Your mission has been compromised by personnel operating outside official authority. I am ordering you to escort the transport to the nearest Allied airbase for immediate inspection. Her threat warning receiver activated as one of the escort fighters achieved missile lock on her aircraft. The pilot was making a choice between conflicting authorities, and the decision could determine whether this situation escalated into American pilots firing on each other over Turkish airspace. Eagle 1, break lock immediately. I am transmitting evidence that will demonstrate the illegal nature of this operation. Vesper activated her aircraft's secure data transmission system, uploading encrypted files that contained photographs of the weapon's cache, intercepted communications detailing the conspiracy, and authorization codes from General Hayes confirming her authority to stop the mission by any means necessary. The missile lock disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Captain Jake Morrison, no relation to the colonel at Ramstein, felt his world shift as he processed the encrypted data package that had just appeared on his secure display. The photographs showed weapon systems he recognized, packaged for transport in ways that completely contradicted the humanitarian mission briefing he'd received. The communications intercepts revealed a conspiracy that reached high enough into military command to forge the orders under which he was currently operating. Morrison had been flying escort missions for 3 years, protecting everything from medical supplies to VIP transports across conflict zones in the Middle East. He developed instincts for when missions felt wrong, when the details didn't add up, when someone was using legitimate military resources for purposes that wouldn't survive official scrutiny. This mission had triggered every one of those instincts from the moment he'd received the briefing. Eagle 2, did you copy that data transmission? His wingman's response was tense with the same realization that was hitting Morrison. Eagle 1, if this intelligence is accurate, we're protecting an operation that could start a war. Morrison looked at the transport aircraft flying steadily ahead of them, its cargo hold filled with weapons that were apparently destined for use in false flag attacks designed to justify American military retaliation. The pilot of that aircraft was probably as unaware as Morrison had been 5 minutes ago, following orders that seemed legitimate but had been issued by people with their own agenda. Lifeline 47, this is Eagle 1. You are ordered to immediately divert to Incirlik Air Base. This is not a request. The C-17 pilot's response carried the confusion of someone whose mission had just been transformed into something completely different. Eagle 1, I have explicit orders to continue to original destination. I need confirmation from base operations before I can deviate from flight plan. Morrison felt the weight of command decisions settling on his shoulders. He was being asked to choose between following orders issued through official channels and preventing what appeared to be an operation that could have catastrophic consequences for American foreign policy and regional stability. Lifeline 47, your base operations has been compromised. The orders you received were issued by personnel operating outside official authority. You will divert immediately, or we will consider your continued approach to be hostile action. The transport aircraft began a slow turn toward the northwest, the pilot apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor when faced with fighter aircraft whose loyalty had just shifted to preventing rather than protecting the mission. Vesper watched the formation execute the course change with professional satisfaction. The immediate threat had been neutralized without shots fired, but intelligence suggested that similar operations were launching from 2 additional bases. She needed to coordinate rapid response to multiple sites while ensuring that the weapons already in the air didn't reach their intended destinations. Wraith 7 to command, primary target is diverting to Incirlik. Request immediate dispatch of security teams to secure cargo and aircrew for debriefing. What's our status on the secondary sites? General Hayes's response carried the strain of someone coordinating multiple crisis situations simultaneously. Wraith 7, operations at Sigonella and Diego Garcia are proceeding on schedule. Intelligence indicates both sites have similar cargo loads destined for different regions. If those weapons reach their destinations, we're looking at potential false flag operations across 3 different conflict zones. The implications made Vesper's blood run cold. Someone had been planning to use American military technology to stage attacks in multiple regions simultaneously, creating justification for military responses that could reshape international alliances and potentially trigger broader conflicts. The sophistication required to coordinate such an operation suggested resources and access that reached the highest levels of military command. Command, I need authorization to engage multiple targets. This is beyond single aircraft capability. Wraith 7, authorization granted. You have tactical command of all Allied aircraft in the region. Use whatever resources necessary to prevent those weapons from reaching their destinations. Vesper felt the familiar weight of operational command settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just a pilot intercepting a single aircraft. She was coordinating a multi-theater operation to prevent what amounted to an attempt to manipulate American foreign policy through false flag attacks using stolen military technology. The sky around her was about to become much more complicated. Colonel Isabella Santos had been commanding Naval Air Station Sigonella for 18 months, and she'd never faced a situation as complex as the one developing on her runway. A C-5M Super Galaxy was scheduled to depart in 40 minutes, carrying what the manifest described as construction equipment destined for a contractor facility in North Africa. The aircraft had all proper authorizations. The cargo had been loaded by personnel with appropriate security clearances, and the flight crew had been briefed according to standard protocols. The problem was the encrypted communication she just received from General Hayes, containing intelligence that suggested the entire operation was a cover for weapons smuggling that could destabilize the entire Mediterranean region. According to the intelligence package, her base was being used as a staging area for weapons systems that would be delivered to groups operating in Libya, where they could be used to justify military interventions that would reshape North African politics. Santos stood in the base operations center, watching the massive transport aircraft through reinforced windows, trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she was being told. The C-5M was one of the largest aircraft in the American military inventory, capable of carrying payloads that could equip entire military units. If the intelligence was accurate, that aircraft contained enough advanced weapons systems to change the balance of power across multiple conflict zones. Colonel, we have an F-16 inbound at high speed. Call sign Wraith 7. Pilot is requesting immediate landing clearance and priority handling. Santos felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to connect. Wraith 7 was the call sign mentioned in General Hayes's communication, associated with a pilot who had apparently been operating outside official records for the past 4 years, but was now coordinating the response to what appeared to be a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of military command. Clear Wraith 7 for immediate landing, priority handling, and ground that C-5 immediately. No one boards or disembarks without my personal authorization. Through the operations center windows, Santos could see the F-16 approaching the runway at a speed that suggested the pilot was pushing the aircraft near its operational limits. The landing was textbook perfect despite the high approach speed, and the fighter was taxiing toward base operations before the engines had fully spooled down. The woman who climbed out of the cockpit moved with the fluid precision of someone who had been flying high-performance aircraft for decades, but she was wearing a civilian flight suit that didn't match any standard military configuration. Santos watched her approach the operations building, noting how she automatically scanned the flight line, cataloged aircraft positions, and identified potential security concerns with the unconscious awareness of someone who belonged in this environment. Colonel Santos, I'm Vesper Thorne. I believe General Hayes has briefed you on the situation we're facing. Santos studied the woman's face, seeing the controlled intensity of someone operating under extreme pressure while maintaining complete professional composure. Ms. Thorne, the intelligence package General Hayes transmitted suggests that my base is being used for operations I never authorized. I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Vesper glanced toward the C-5M Galaxy sitting on the tarmac, its massive form dark against the Mediterranean sky. Colonel, that aircraft contains weapon systems that will be used to stage false flag attacks across North Africa. The attacks will be attributed to various groups, but they'll be sophisticated enough to justify American military responses that will reshape the political landscape across the entire region. We have approximately 30 minutes to prevent those weapons from reaching their destination. Technical Sergeant Maria Gonzalez had been loading cargo on military aircraft for 15 years, and she developed an eye for shipments that didn't match their documentation. The containers secured in the C-5M Galaxy's cargo hold were labeled as construction equipment, but their weight distribution, securing requirements, and handling instructions suggested they contained something much more sophisticated and dangerous. When she'd questioned the loadmaster about the discrepancies, she'd been told that the cargo was classified equipment for contractor operations, and that her job was to secure it properly, not to ask questions about its contents. But Gonzalez had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and she knew the difference between construction equipment and military hardware. What they'd loaded onto this aircraft could equip a small army. She was performing final cargo checks when base security arrived with orders to ground the aircraft and secure all personnel involved in the loading operation. The security team was led by a woman in civilian clothes who moved with the authority of someone accustomed to command, her eyes cataloging details with the precision of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. Sergeant Gonzalez, I need you to help me inspect the cargo manifest and compare it to what's actually secured in this aircraft. Gonzalez recognized the tone of voice, someone with legitimate authority asking for professional cooperation in a situation where lives might depend on getting the details right. Ma'am, I documented discrepancies between the manifest and the actual cargo, but I was told not to pursue the matter further. Sergeant, I need to see your documentation immediately. What we're looking at here could affect the stability of the entire region. As they climbed into the cargo hold, Gonzalez felt the familiar weight of operational responsibility that came with situations where doing her job correctly could prevent disasters that other people would never know had been possible. The woman beside her moved through the cargo area with the confidence of someone who had spent significant time in similar environments, her hands automatically checking securing straps, weight distribution, and safety systems with the precision of someone who understood the consequences of getting those details wrong. "Ma'am, what kind of equipment are we actually looking at?" Vesper was photographing serial numbers on containers that were supposed to contain construction machinery, but actually held guidance systems for precision munitions. "The kind that starts wars, Sergeant. The kind that gets people killed in ways that make the killing seem justified." The secure radio in the operations center crackled with General Hayes's voice, transmitted with encryption that suggested the highest levels of classification. "Colonel Santos, we've confirmed similar operations at 3 additional bases. Someone has been systematically using